The black and white image flickers slightly. The timestamp on the security camera reads 2:17 a.m. In the left corner of the screen, the date pulses in cold, digital numbers. On the left, the grainy footage displays the interior of the mansion's main office. On the right, in high definition, a man's face appears in close-up. Disheveled graying hair, heavy stubble, deep dark circles carved beneath his eyes. Edward Sterling stares at the screen as if he were looking at a ghost. In the video, the housekeeper is on her knees on the beige marble floor. Her blue uniform is rumpled, one sleeve stained with something that could be cough syrup or tears. Elena holds a small girl in her arms, Lucy, 6 years old, wearing unicorn pajamas, shivering with cold and fear. The child's body fits against the woman's frame as if she had always belonged in those arms. Lucy grips the hem of Elena's uniform with tiny fingers, her face buried in her shoulder, sobbing, unable to catch her breath. On the floor between them, an empty pill bottle rolls slowly until it hits the baseboard of the bookshelf. The crumpled label still shows half the name, Clonazep. The camera captures the moment Elena looks at the bottle, then at the girl, then at the door, as if expecting someone to burst in and accuse her at any second. She cries. It isn't a loud, scandalous cry. It's the kind of weeping that makes her chin tremble, her shoulders rising and falling in short, sharp jolts. Her lips move, but there is no sound on the recording. You can only see the silent plea in the way she squeezes Lucy closer, as if she wants to shield her from the entire world. On the other side of the split screen, Edward hits the play button again, and again, and again. The same clip repeats. Elena on her knees, the girl shaking, the empty bottle rolling. He watches it as if he were being forced to swallow glass, millimeter by millimeter. "I thought it was a thief," he murmurs, his voice barely audible. "I accused the only person who saved my daughter." His finger, trembling, pauses the video at the exact moment Elena covers her face with her free hand and seems to crumble from the inside out. The image freezes there, her eyes red, the child clinging to her neck like a survivor clinging to a buoy in the open ocean. 3 days earlier, a crystal glass shatters on the kitchen floor. The sound cracks against the tile like a gunshot. Transparent shards slide across the white floor, some still vibrating in place. The morning light hits one of them, creating a small deformed rainbow near the drain. Elena freezes with the dish towel in her hand. She was drying the silverware when the glass slipped from Lucy's hand. The girl was sitting on the counter, legs swinging, curious eyes watching everything, little fingers slippery on the wet glass. A distraction, a slip, and the silence of the morning is replaced by a sharp crack followed by the delicate sound of crystal dying in pieces. "I'm sorry, Miss Elena," whispers Lucy, her eyes already welling up, her face turning red. "I didn't mean to." Elena takes a deep breath. The muscles in her face relax. She looks at the girl's bare feet, inches away from the shards. In a quick movement, she grabs Lucy by the waist and lifts her, moving her away from the danger. "Stay right there, sweetie," she says, placing the girl on a chair further away. "Don't get down. Understood?" Lucy nods, tears starting to stream, her bottom lip trembling. Elena crouches down. Her knees make a soft pop, a sign that it isn't the first time she's bent over backwards to clean up someone else's mess. With almost surgical care, she begins to gather the pieces of glass, wrapping her hand in a cloth. Every fragment goes into a metal bin. Her eyes scan the floor as if searching for invisible threats. A door slams in the background. Elena doesn't need to turn around to know who walked in. The air in the kitchen changes. It gets heavier, colder. His presence fills the entire room. "What was that?" asks Edward, his voice cutting through the atmosphere like a blade. He enters the frame. Crisp white shirt, no tie, dark dress slacks, expensive watch on his wrist. Even at home, on a Tuesday morning, he dresses as if he's always about to close a deal. His hair, peppered with gray, is tousled, not from carelessness, but from the habitual haste of a man who believes everyone else's time is worth less than his own. Elena straightens up slowly, still holding a large shard of crystal in the cloth. "It was an accident, Mr. Sterling," she says, keeping her eyes lowered. "I apologize, I'll replace the glass." Who had the glass? He looks from the housekeeper to his daughter, not really seeing the girl, just analyzing the scene like a crime scene. "It was me," starts Lucy, but her voice vanishes when her father's gaze locks onto her. "Do you know how much a glass like that costs?" he asks without raising his voice, but every word is loaded with a deafening impatience. "You don't need to worry about that, sir." Elena intervenes immediately, pulling the blame onto herself. I left it too close to the edge of the counter. It was my carelessness. Edward turns his eyes back to her. The way he looks at her is strange, as if he's looking at something that doesn't compute. A maid taking the fall for his daughter. An employee speaking with a calm voice, without stuttering, without shrinking away. He notices the pressed blue uniform, the upright posture, the hair pulled back in a simple bun, no loose strands. He notices there is no smell of cigarettes, no excessive makeup, no look of automatic subservience. There is something else there, something that irritates him without him being able to name it. "You're new here, aren't you?" he asks, though he already knows the answer. He authorized the hiring himself. "Yes, I am, sir," says Elena. "I arrived yesterday." She had entered through the back of the estate before the sun came up. The street still smelled of early morning dew, and the service gate was ajar. She arrived carrying a worn backpack and a clear plastic envelope with documents. Nursing degree, transcripts, internship records, papers that were worth nothing inside those walls. She was interviewed in the kitchen, amidst the noise of pots and pans and the smell of coffee. Edward's wife, Marianne, flipped through the documents with a mix of curiosity and guilt. "You're actually a nurse?" she asked, unable to hide her surprise. "I am," answered Elena. "Certified. I worked for 5 years at the county hospital, but my license isn't recognized here in this state yet. I'm trying to get it reinstated, but the process is expensive and slow." Marianne pressed her lips together, looking out the window at the impeccable lawn, as if trying to fit that information into her own conscience. "The only job I could get was this one," Elena added, without playing the victim, just stating a fact. "I need to support my mother and," she hesitated for a second, "and pay for a family member's treatment." Marianne looked away. She didn't ask any more questions. She signed the papers, hired the nurse as a maid. Now in the kitchen, Edward stares at that same woman with the micro-expressions of someone sensing something rotten in the air. A small wrinkle deepens beside his nostril. The corner of his mouth twitches. A millisecond of disgust. "You're too quick to take the blame, Elena," he comments, adjusting his cuff. "People who are too good are always hiding something." The sentence hangs in the air. Elena keeps her body still, only her fingers tightening around the cloth wrapping the glass shard until her knuckles turn white. "I just don't want Lucy to be scolded for an accident, sir," she says, her voice still low but firm. "Kids drop things. The important thing is she didn't get hurt." He gives a short laugh, devoid of humor. "You talk as if you were her mother," he comments, "but you are here to clean up what she drops, not to raise her." Lucy listens. Her big eyes get wet again. She looks at Elena, searching for a reaction, a micro-expression. Anything that says, "It's okay." Elena drops the cloth, washes her hands in the sink. The movements are technical, precise, almost clinical. She doesn't look like a maid, Edward thinks. She looks like a nurse. She looks like someone carrying too much knowledge to fit inside that blue uniform. That was what bothered him from the very first instant. The night before, watching Elena enter through the service door with the backpack on her shoulders, he felt that same discomfort. "People like that are too good to be true," he commented later in the bedroom, while unbuttoning his shirt. "People who claim to be nurses but accept being maids for any wage always have something to hide." Marianne took a moment to respond. Sitting on the edge of the bed, taking off her earrings, she frowned. "Edward, she just needs work," she said without much conviction. "Times are tough for everyone." He shrugged. "I don't trust people who seem too perfect," he insisted. "The worst stories I've ever seen involved people like that. Saintly face, dirty past." Back in the kitchen, Edward takes a deep breath. "Clean up this floor and then come speak to me in the study," he says finally. "And today you eat outside, in the mudroom by the utility sink. I don't want you circulating through the house while I'm here." Marianne, who had just entered to get a pitcher of juice, stops in her tracks. "Edward, that's not necessary," she starts, looking from Elena to her husband, trying to balance the two versions of reality inside her head. He cuts her off with a look. "You said yourself you need someone who knows their place in this house, Marianne. Let me establish the boundaries." Elena feels the blood rise to her face. A pink flush appears on her cheeks. She doesn't protest. She doesn't argue. She just lowers her head a centimeter, enough to show she understands, but not enough to look broken. Lucy, however, can't hold back. "But I like having lunch with Miss Elena," she says, her thin voice crossing the space, innocent and direct. "She teaches me the names of the medicines, and lets me listen to the dolls' hearts. Edward pushes his chair back from the table with a sharp drag. "Lucy, go to your room, please," he orders. "Now." The girl's eyes fill with tears, but she obeys. She climbs down from the chair, takes 3 steps, then stops beside Elena and lightly rests her forehead against Elena's arm. "Will you come play with me later?" she asks, almost whispering. "If they let me, I will," answers Elena, with a small, brief smile that only Lucy sees. Edward notices the scene, and it irritates him more than any broken glass. Elena eats lunch alone, sitting on a plastic stool near the utility sink in the drafty mudroom, her plate balanced on top of the washing machine. The food is still warm, but the cold wind creeping under the back door makes everything less appetizing. She eats in silence, listening, in the distance, to the sound of the television in the dining room, the laughter of a show that doesn't match the heaviness of that house. The estate's garden stretches out before her through the window, impeccably trimmed. The colorful flowers, aligned in perfect rows, contrast with the gray concrete of the mudroom and the dirty water dripping into the drain. It is an invisible border. On one side, the world that can be shown. On the other, the world that must be hidden. Inside the house, Edward drinks coffee at the head of the table. Marianne stirs her sugar distractedly, without looking at him. "Don't you think you're exaggerating?" she asks finally. He lifts his eyes from his tablet. "Exaggerating? About what? Segregating her like that, making her eat by the utility sink. I don't know, Edward. Isn't it a bit humiliating?" He gives a dry laugh. "She works here, Marianne. She's not family. And I prefer to humiliate a little now than to find out later she was dipping her hand in our pockets, or worse." "Or worse how?" Marianne insists, not realizing the question irritates him. He leans back in his chair. "People with too much backstory always return to the scene of the crime," he answers. "A nurse who is now a maid. She must have done something stupid where she worked. A mistake, negligence. Nobody leaves a hospital to scrub toilets by choice." Marianne swallows hard. A small wave of shame passes over her face, but she doesn't let it reach her eyes. Being married to Edward means, among other things, learning to swallow these things without chewing too much. Outside, Elena finishes eating. She washes her own plate in the utility sink. Her hands move automatically, but her head is far away. She thinks of her mother at home, trying to take the right pill without mixing it with the others. She thinks of her brother admitted to the county hospital, waiting for a bed in the proper ward. She thinks of the line to renew her license, the fee she still needs to pay. She thinks about how every spoonful of rice on that plate was bought with hours of silent labor. In the middle of the afternoon, Lucy has a coughing fit. It starts as a throat clearing, the kind any adult would ignore. But Elena is passing through the hallway at that exact moment. Her trained ear catches the difference. The cough is deeper, more dragging. There is a wheeze on the exhale, and a slight tone of desperation in the way the girl pulls for air. She enters the room without knocking. Lucy is sitting on the bed, tablet in her lap, breathing fast, her chest rising and falling faster than it should. "Lucy, look at me," asks Elena, already approaching. "Where is your inhaler?" "In the drawer," answers the girl, pointing in a vague direction. Elena doesn't waste time. She opens the correct drawer, grabs the device, checks the nozzle, verifies it's working. Her hand doesn't shake. "You know how to use it, remember?" she asks while fitting the mouthpiece. The girl nods. Elena positions the inhaler, counts the time, watches the child's chest respond. In a few minutes, the breathing begins to regulate, but Lucy's eyes remain wide, terrified. "It's passing," says Elena, softening her voice. "Just a little bit more, okay?" Edward appears in the doorway at that instant. The scene he sees is this. His daughter sitting on the bed, inhaler in her mouth, and the maid in front of her, controlling the device and speaking to the girl with the confidence of someone who has done this dozens of times. What is going on here? The question comes loaded, not with concern, but with suspicion. Lucy pulls the mouthpiece from her mouth too fast, coughing again. "Dad, She tries to explain, but Elena steps forward. She started wheezing. "Mr. Sterling," she explains, unafraid of his presence. "I used the inhaler to stabilize her. It's under control." He looks at her as if she has committed a felony. "Who gave you authorization to touch my daughter's medication?" His tone rises a notch. "Who do you think you are to take that kind of decision in this house?" Elena holds her breath for a second. That hurts more than any lunch ban. "I am a trained nurse, sir," she answers slowly. "I have experience with asthmatic crises. If I waited, it could have gotten worse. He gives a short smile, devoid of joy. Unlicensed nurse, you mean? In here you are a maid, and a maid asks permission before touching any bottle in this house. Marianne appears right behind him, drawn by the raised voice. Edward? No, Marianne, he cuts her off without taking his eyes off Elena. I will not allow someone I barely know to play doctor in here. What if something went wrong? What if she had a reaction? Who would be responsible? You? Elena keeps her gaze steady, but there is a wet shine forming in the corner of her eyes. I wasn't going to let her run out of air, she says simply. I would do it again. It is hard to believe someone can be so cruel, isn't it? Seeing a potential mother figure treated as a threat for trying to protect a child. If you also feel outrage at this injustice, hit that like button right now to show you're on Elena's side. Edward wipes a hand over his face, trying to regain control. From today on, he continues, every word cutting. You do not go near my daughter without my authorization, nor any medication whatsoever. And if I catch you again touching something that is not your purview, you are on the street. Understood? Elena just nods. She doesn't trust her own voice in that moment. Lucy, her small chest still heaving, looks from her father to Elena, confused. Her eyes fill with tears once more, but this time she doesn't run to her father. She reaches her hand out toward the maid, in an instinctive reflex of someone who knows who was really by her side when the air ran out. Elena doesn't move. She keeps her hands at her sides, fingers twitching slightly. She knows any wrong gesture will be used against her. The afternoon advances. The sun angles over the garden, lengthening the shadows of the trees across the lawn. Inside the house, tension settles in the corners, like dust that no one sees, but everyone breathes. At the end of the day, Edward walks into his walk-in closet to take out the Italian leather jacket he bought on a recent trip. The space is vast, smelling of cedar and expensive cologne. The clothes are organized by color, shoes aligned on shelves. He slides the door open, reaches out toward the hanger where the jacket should be. His hand finds empty space. For a second, Edward only feels the cold air of the space where the leather should be. His brain takes a moment to accept what his fingers already know. He looks down. The jacket is on the floor, fallen to one side, a sleeve twisted under its own weight. A jagged tear, edges pulled tight, cuts across the back, right in the middle, as if it had been pulled by something, caught on something, or mistreated by careless hands. The camera, if it existed there, would zoom in on what happened next. Elena's hands, hours earlier, appearing in the same closet, putting away a stack of freshly pressed shirts. She leans in to hang the last piece. The jacket hanger slips, the garment slides, gets caught on the corner of a half-open drawer. A discreet sound of expensive fabric tearing. Elena closes her eyes for a second, the whole world compressing into that sound. Now, Edward holds the torn leather with his fingertips. His gaze narrows, and the anger that had been scattered in small doses throughout the day suddenly finds a perfect target. The sound of tearing leather still echoes in Edward's memory, when he descends the stairs holding the Italian jacket with both hands, as if carrying evidence of a crime. His shoes hit the marble in a calculated, firm rhythm, the kind of walk that refuses to be interrupted. His jaw is locked, eyes fixed straight ahead. Elena is in the kitchen, drying dishes. The movement of her hands is automatic, rhythmic. Clean plate, dry cloth, shelf, repeat. She doesn't even lift her head when she hears the footsteps approaching, but her whole body recognizes the cadence. That is the walk of someone coming to collect a debt. Edward enters the kitchen and throws the jacket onto the marble island. The leather slides until it stops near the sink, the tear facing up, exposed like an open wound. Can you explain this to me? His voice isn't loud. It's worse. It's low, controlled, dangerous. Elena looks at the jacket. Her face doesn't change expression, but there is a slight tremor in the fingers still holding the cloth. It was an accident, Mr. Sterling, she says, her voice steady but not defiant. When I went to put away the shirts this morning, the jacket slipped off the hanger and got caught on the drawer. I was going to tell you, but you left before I could speak. He gives a short laugh, humorless. Of course. There's always an excuse, isn't there? Do you know how much a jacket like this costs? Elena swallows hard. I don't know, sir, but I can pay it back in installments. I'll deduct it from my salary. Edward leans slightly forward, resting his hands on the counter, invading her personal space. Do you think the salary I pay covers the value of this? Do you think I hire someone to destroy my things? Marianne enters the kitchen at that moment, drawn by her husband's tone. She sees the jacket, Edward's dark face, Elena's rigid posture. Edward, what's happening? He doesn't even look at his wife. This one here, he says, pointing at Elena with his chin, destroyed a $3,000 jacket. Marianne frowns. She looks from one to the other, searching for a middle ground. It was an accident, wasn't it, Elena? It was, ma'am, answers Elena immediately. It was an accident. Edward lets out an exaggerated sigh, throwing his head back as if dealing with a stubborn child. Accident. Everything is an accident with you, isn't it? The glass that broke yesterday was also an accident. Lucy's breathing that you decided to treat without permission was also an accident? That wasn't an accident, sir. That was necessary, Elena responds, and there is a new firmness in her voice, as if the accusation touched a spot that couldn't be bent. Edward straightens up, crossing his arms. Necessary. Did you hear that, Marianne? She decides what is necessary in this house. She, who has been here for 2 days. Marianne takes a deep breath, trying to de-escalate. Edward, let's calm down. She already said she'll pay. Let's resolve this quietly. He doesn't answer. He just leaves the kitchen, taking the jacket with him, but the mood he leaves behind is heavy as lead. Elena goes back to drying the dishes. Her hands shake a little more now. 2 days later, a watch disappears. It's a Rolex wristwatch, a birthday gift Edward received from a partner. He always leaves it on the nightstand before sleeping. That morning, upon waking, he reaches for the usual spot. He finds nothing. He looks under the bed, behind the lamp, inside the drawer. Nothing. Marianne, have you seen my watch? He asks, his voice already edged with panic. She is in the bathroom, applying cream to her face. No. Where did you leave it? On the nightstand, as always. She appears in the doorway. Are you sure? Edward looks at her as if she just insulted his intelligence. I am sure. He pulls on his trousers hurriedly, leaves the room still buttoning his shirt. He descends the stairs in wide strides. Elena is in the living room, dusting the furniture. The morning light streams through the linen curtains, creating soft patches on the hardwood floor. Elena, he calls sharply. She turns, cloth in hand. Yes, sir. Did you enter my room today? I did, sir. To change the sheets. Did you see a watch on the nightstand? Yes, I did. It was there when I started cleaning. He takes 2 steps toward her. And when you finished? Elena hesitates for a fraction of a second. It's enough. It was still there, sir. Edward laughs, but it isn't a fun laugh. It's the kind of sound someone makes when they've already decided the truth before hearing the facts. It was still there. Then explain to me how it vanished. Marianne comes down the stairs at that moment, accompanied by Lucy, who holds her mother's hand and watches everything with big, frightened eyes. Edward, what are you doing? Asks Marianne, sensing the tension. I am trying to find out where my watch is, he answers, without taking his eyes off Elena. And the only person who entered the room today was her. Elena feels the blood rush to her face. She knows this type of accusation. She has lived this before, in another job, in another house. The maid is always the first suspect. Always. I didn't take anything, sir, she says firmly. I don't touch anything that isn't part of my job. Edward crosses his arms. Then you won't mind if I search your bag? The silence that settles in the room is heavy like wet concrete. Marianne opens her mouth. Edward, that is embarrassing. He raises a hand, cutting her off. Embarrassing is having a $10,000 watch vanish inside my own house. Elena takes a deep breath. Her fingers grip the cloth she's still holding. She knows refusing will make everything worse. She knows accepting is humiliating. There is no good choice. You can search it, she says finally, her voice low but controlled. Edward walks to the hook near the back door, where Elena's worn backpack hangs. He grabs the bag, walks back to the living room, and dumps the contents onto the coffee table in front of everyone. An old wallet, a case with some pills, a hairbrush, a crumpled notebook, a USB drive, an old faded photo of Elena as a child next to an older woman. No watch. Edward rummages through everything with his hands, opens the wallet, checks the backpack's internal pockets, shakes the pencil case. Nothing. Marianne exhales the breath she was holding. See? There's nothing, Edward. He doesn't answer. He just gathers everything back onto the table with a brusque movement and throws the backpack back onto the hook. He leaves the room without saying a word. Elena stands there, motionless, looking at her scattered belongings. Her hands shake now, not from fear, but from contained rage, from humiliation, from exhaustion. Lucy breaks away from her mother's hand and runs to Elena, hugging her leg. "You aren't a thief, Miss Elena," says the girl, her voice high and decided. "My dad is wrong." Elena places a hand on the child's head, stroking her blonde hair. She doesn't trust her voice to answer. 2 hours later, Edward finds the watch. It's in the glove compartment of the car, inside a document envelope. He put it there himself before traveling the week before, so he wouldn't forget to take it to the jeweler for an adjustment. He simply forgot. He holds the watch in his hands, sitting in the driver's seat, looking at the golden face. There is a pang of something that could be embarrassment, but he suppresses it quickly. Instead of going up and apologizing, he just puts the watch in his pocket and enters the house in silence. He says nothing to Elena. He doesn't mention the subject. He acts as if nothing happened. Elena notices. Of course she notices. She sees the watch on his wrist that afternoon, gleaming under the chandelier light. But he doesn't look at her. He doesn't acknowledge the mistake. He doesn't offer even a nod of apology. That night, during dinner, the tension is so thick even Lucy feels it. The girl stirs the food on her plate without eating, pushes the rice from one side to the other, cuts the chicken into smaller and smaller pieces, but brings nothing to her mouth. "Lucy, eat," orders Edward, without lifting his eyes from his own plate. "I don't want to," answers the girl quietly. "It's not optional. You need to eat." Lucy shakes her head, her eyes starting to turn red. "I'll only eat if Miss Elena is here." Edward drops his fork with a sharp clatter. "Miss Elena is not family, Lucy. She works here. She does not sit at the table with us. But I want her." The girl's voice starts to tremble. "She knows the medicines. She knows when I'm getting sick." Edward takes a deep breath, trying to maintain patience. "Your mother knows how to take care of you. Your mother is here." Marianne reaches out, trying to take the fork from her daughter. "Come on, love, I'll help you." Lucy pushes the plate away, her chest starting to rise and fall faster. "I don't want to. I want Miss Elena." Edward stands up from the chair. "Enough. You are going to eat now. And I don't want to hear another word about the maid." He grabs the fork from Marianne's hand and tries to put food in his daughter's mouth. Lucy turns her face away, tears streaming down, breathing accelerating. Edward forces the spoon one more time. The girl gags, coughs, her whole body convulsing. And then, in a sudden movement, Lucy vomits on the plate, on her lap, on the table. The silence that follows is broken only by the muffled sound of Lucy sobbing. Marianne stands up quickly, grabbing napkins, cleaning her daughter, murmuring words of comfort. Edward drops the fork, backs away from the table, wipes a hand over his face. "This is her fault," he mutters, pointing vaguely in the direction of the kitchen, where Elena is washing dishes. "This is her fault. She created this dependency." Marianne doesn't answer. She just picks Lucy up in her arms and goes up the stairs, leaving Edward alone in the dining room, surrounded by the remains of the ruined dinner. The next day, Elena seeks out Marianne in the garden. Her employer is watering the flowers, distracted, her face tired. "Mrs. Marianne, may I speak with you?" Marianne turns, turning off the hose. "Of course, Elena." "What is it?" Elena takes a deep breath. "I think it's best if I leave." Marianne frowns. "Why? Because of what happened yesterday?" "Because of everything, ma'am. Mr. Sterling doesn't trust me. I don't want to create more problems. It will be better for everyone." Marianne shakes her head, stepping closer. "Elena, please don't go. I trust you. And Lucy needs you. She's never attached to anyone like this. Since you arrived, she's calmer, more secure." Elena looks away, biting her lip. "But Mr. Sterling—" "I will talk to him," Marianne interrupts, placing a hand on Elena's arm. "I'll make him understand. Please stay, just a little longer, until we sort things out." Elena hesitates. She thinks of her mother, her brother in the hospital, the bills, the license renewal that is still far from happening. "All right, ma'am," she says finally, "but if things don't improve, I'll have to go." Marianne smiles, relieved. "Thank you, Elena. Seriously. You don't know how much this means." That afternoon, Edward goes up to Lucy's room with a small box in his hands. Lucy is sitting on the bed, flipping through a coloring book. She looks up when her father enters. "Hi, Dad." "Hi, Princess." he replies, and there is a forced softness in his voice. I brought you something. He pulls a small teddy bear out of the box with a hidden camera inside. The toy's plastic eyes are actually discreet lenses. Look how cute, he says, placing the bear on the shelf next to the bed, adjusting the angle. I'll leave him here to keep you company. Lucy smiles, but not with much excitement. Thanks, Dad. He kisses her forehead and leaves the room. Later in the living room, Edward installs another camera inside a decorative vase, positioned to cover the entrance and the main furniture. He does it all calmly, checking angles on his phone, testing the connection. Marianne passes through the hallway and stops when she sees him messing with the vase. What are you doing? He doesn't look up, taking necessary precautions. Edward, this is ridiculous. He finally looks at her, and there is something cold in his eyes. I'm going to catch this con artist, Marianne. You can be sure. And when I catch her, you'll see I was right from the start. Marianne opens her mouth to answer, but gives up. She shakes her head and leaves, letting him be alone with his plans. Edward sits on the sofa, opens the app on his phone, and sees the two cameras streaming live. Lucy's room. The living room. Everything registered. Everything recorded. He smiles sideways, satisfied. Now it's just a matter of time, he murmurs to himself. The hours pass. Night falls over the estate. Lights turn on one by one. Inside the house, each person carries their own burden. Edward sitting in the office reviewing the recordings. Marianne lying in bed staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. Lucy hugging the new teddy bear, breathing slowly, her chest rising and falling in a fragile rhythm. Elena, in the small back room, sits on the edge of the narrow bed, holding the crumpled photo of her mother, whispering a silent prayer. She doesn't know she's being filmed. She doesn't know every move she makes is being watched. She doesn't know that at that exact moment, Edward is watching the recording of her entering the living room earlier, picking up a remote control that had fallen behind the sofa, placing it back on the table, and leaving. He reviews the scene 3 times, looking for something, anything, to justify his suspicions. But he finds nothing. Just a woman doing her job. Just a maid being a maid. And that somehow irritates him even more. It is revolting to see someone treated with such disdain, isn't it? If you also think Elena deserves respect, and that justice must be done, leave a like right now to support this warrior. The housekeeper is named Mrs. Higgins. She is 62 years old, white hair pulled back in a tight bun, hands marked by decades of domestic work. She has worked in the Sterling household for nearly 15 years. She knows every corner of that mansion, every routine, every secret the walls guard. She is invisible most of the time, the kind of presence only noticed when something goes wrong. Edward calls her into the study on a Thursday afternoon. Mrs. Higgins, I need to speak with you, he says, without looking up from the desk, shuffling papers as if the matter were just another item on the list. She enters, wiping her hands on her apron. There is a tension in the air she recognizes immediately. It's the same atmosphere as when the old mistress was fired, or when the gardener was accused of stealing wine from the cellar. Yes, Mr. Sterling? He finally raises his eyes. There is something calculated in the way he observes her, as if measuring her loyalty. You've worked here for quite a long time, haven't you? 15 years, sir. So you know the routine of the house well. You know when something is out of place. She nods, not knowing where this is going. Edward leans back in his chair, interlocking his fingers on the desk. I have reasons to believe Elena is not who she says she is. I have the impression she is here with other intentions. Mrs. Higgins swallows hard. She knows this kind of conversation. She has participated in it before, always on the wrong side. You think she is stealing, sir? Edward shrugs, as if the answer were obvious. I don't know yet. But I know people who seem too saintly are always hiding something. And you, being here every day, must have seen something. Haven't you? There is a heavy pause. Mrs. Higgins feels the weight of the question. She knows she is being tested. She knows the wrong answer could cost her job. Well, sir. She hesitates, searching for words that won't compromise her. I haven't seen anything wrong, no. Edward's face closes up a little. Nothing? Really nothing? She feels the pressure increase, sees his gaze narrow. She thinks of the overdue rent, the unemployed daughter living with her, the expensive medication she needs to buy every month. Now that you mention it, her voice comes out lower, almost a whisper. I saw her messing with some drawers in the office the other day. It looked like she was looking for something. Edward leans forward, interested. Closed drawers? Mrs. Higgins hesitates for a fraction of a second, then nods. Yes, sir. Closed. It is a lie. She never saw Elena near the office, but the way Edward looks at her makes it clear what he wants to hear. And Mrs. Higgins, after 15 years of service, learned to survive by saying what the bosses want to hear. Are you sure about that? Asks Edward. But it isn't a real question, it's a confirmation. I am, sir, she answers. And the lie comes out easier now that it's been said once. She was there, snooping. Edward leans back again, satisfied. Thank you, Mrs. Higgins. You helped me a lot. You can return to work. She leaves the office with shaky legs, feeling the weight of the lie stick to her back like mud. But relieved, because at least she wasn't fired. At least she wasn't the sacrifice this time. That night, the house is quiet. Marianne is away. She went to visit her sister in another city, taking only a small suitcase and a promise to return the next day. Edward is in the office, as always, reviewing financial reports, answering emails, sipping whiskey slowly. Lucy is in her room, alone. The girl wakes up with a tightness in her chest. Not pain exactly. It's a lack. As if the air were heavier, harder to pull. She sits up in bed trying to breathe deep, but the air doesn't fill her lungs as it should. Panic starts slowly. First just discomfort, then worry, then fear spreading fast. Lucy tries to call her father, but her voice doesn't come out. Her chest tightens more. The wheezing starts, that thin, scary sound she already knows well. Elena is in the back room, lying down, but not sleeping. She never sleeps right in the first days of a new job. Her body is still alert, ear tuned to any strange sound. And then she hears it. It's a low, muffled sound, as if someone were trying to cough but couldn't, coming from the floor above. Elena gets up immediately. She doesn't think. She just reacts. Runs up the stairs barefoot, heart racing, nursing instincts taking over. She enters Lucy's room without knocking. The girl is sitting on the bed, face pale, lips starting to turn blue at the edges. Her hands grip the sheet, eyes wide, searching for air that doesn't come. Lucy, look at me, says Elena, already approaching. Where is your inhaler? The girl points to the nightstand, but when Elena opens the drawer, she finds nothing. Looks under the bed, on the shelf, in the closet. Nothing. The inhaler isn't there. Elena feels the adrenaline spike, thinks fast, knows the protocol, knows she has few minutes before the crisis worsens. Come with me, she says, picking Lucy up in her arms. The girl is too light, her small body shaking against hers. Elena runs down to the kitchen, turns on the stove, puts water to boil in a large pot. While the water heats, she grabs a clean towel, wets it in the sink, wrings it out. Lucy is sitting on the chair, chest rising and falling in short spasms. Her eyes search for Elena with a mix of trust and panic. It's going to be okay, my love, says Elena, trying to keep her voice calm. I'm here. I won't let anything happen to you. The water starts to boil. Elena takes the pot, places it on the table, covers Lucy's head with the damp towel, creating an improvised steam tent. She holds the girl near the steam, controlling the distance so as not to burn, but close enough for the hot, humid air to start opening the airways. Breathe slowly, Lucy, she instructs with a firm but soft voice. Slowly. Let the air in. The girl obeys, or tries to. The wheezing continues, but gradually, very slowly, her breathing begins to regulate. Her chest still rises and falls fast, but air is passing through. Elena doesn't let go of the girl. She stays there, holding her in her lap, monitoring every inhalation, every exhalation, feeling the accelerated heartbeat start to slow down. Half an hour passes, then an hour, then two. Lucy finally relaxes. Her small body settles into Elena's lap, head resting on her shoulder, breathing still irregular but stable. You're okay now, whispers Elena, stroking the girl's hair. Everything is fine. Lucy lifts her face, eyes red from crying so much. I was scared, she says, voice raspy. I thought I was going to suffocate. Elena squeezes the girl closer. I know, sweetie. But I wasn't going to let that happen. Never. They stay there, in the kitchen, under the weak light of the lamp while the house sleeps around them. Upstairs in the office, Edward is sitting in front of the computer. He has 3 screens open. One shows the living room, another shows Lucy's room, the third shows the hallway, all empty. He reviews the recordings of the last few hours, fast-forwards, stops, rewinds, looks for something, anything to justify the feeling that he is being deceived. But there is nothing. Just empty rooms. Just shadows moving when the wind blows the curtains. He drinks another sip of whiskey. Frustration begins to accumulate. It's been days since he installed the cameras. Days he's been watching. And nothing. Absolutely nothing. Edward squints, tired. Looks at the clock. 3 in the morning. He's about to turn off the computer when something catches his attention. On the screen of Lucy's room there is movement. He stops, rewinds the recording. He sees Elena entering the room, sees her searching for something, sees her picking Lucy up, sees the two leaving in a rush. Edward frowns, advances to the living room camera. Nothing. Advances to the hallway one. Nothing. Where did they go? He feels a pang of something he can't identify. It's not exactly worry. It's not exactly anger. It's something in between. He gets up from the chair, leaves the office, walks down the hall. The house is silent. Passes Lucy's room. Empty. Descends the stairs. And then he hears low voices coming from the kitchen. He walks slowly, approaches the half-open door, looks inside. Elena is sitting on the chair with Lucy in her lap. The girl is sleeping, breathing finally peaceful, face resting on the maid's chest. Elena has her eyes closed, head tilted back, but she isn't sleeping. She is just there, holding the child, protecting. Edward stands there in the doorway, observing. He sees the pot with water still steaming, sees the damp towel thrown on the table, sees the inhaler that should be in the room, but that he himself put away in another place without telling anyone, because he was reorganizing the medicine cabinet. He understands. The crisis, the improvisation, the whole night. And he was in the office looking for proof of a crime that never happened. Edward feels something strange in his chest, something that could be shame, if he allowed it. But he doesn't allow it. Instead, he backs away from the door in silence, returns to the office, closes the laptop. He sits in the dark, staring at nothing. He thinks about the way he accused Elena, the way he humiliated her, the way he manipulated Mrs. Higgins to lie, the way he installed cameras to watch her every move, and she was saving his daughter. He presses his fingers to his temples, trying to organize his thoughts, tries to find a justification, tries to find a way to keep believing he was right, but he can't. Dawn drags on. The sky begins to lighten slowly, dyeing the horizon gray, then pale pink, then weak gold. Elena remains in the kitchen holding Lucy, who now sleeps deeply, chest rising and falling in a finally calm rhythm. She doesn't know Edward saw her, doesn't know he is in the office fighting his own conscience, doesn't know that for the first time since she arrived, he is beginning to question if he was wrong. But she also doesn't know that, on his laptop, there is a recording he hasn't seen yet. A recording from the office from 2 days ago, showing something that will change everything. And when the sun finally rises, Edward opens the laptop again, clicks on the old recordings folder, selects the office one, and presses play. On the screen, the black and white image of the empty office appears. The clock reads 10:34 p.m. The door opens. Someone enters. Edward leans forward, narrowing his eyes. The figure on the screen isn't Elena. It's Mrs. Higgins, and she is opening the office drawers, searching for something, face tense, hands shaking. She grabs an envelope, opens it, takes some bills from inside, stuffs them in her apron pocket, closes everything again, and leaves hurriedly. Edward freezes, replays the scene. Once, twice, 3 times. The woman he trusted to testify against Elena was, in fact, the person stealing from him all along. And he, blinded by his own arrogance, accused the wrong person. The weight of that discovery falls on him like an entire building collapsing. He looks at the screen, at the frozen image of Mrs. Higgins leaving the office with stolen money in her pocket, and then he looks at the kitchen door, where, at that exact moment, Elena is waking Lucy gently, helping the girl back up to her room, whispering words of comfort. Edward closes his eyes, and for the first time in years he feels the crushing weight of having misjudged someone. Edward doesn't turn off the laptop. He sits there in the dark of the office, the screen light illuminating his face. His fingers tremble slightly over the mouse as he drags the scroll bar back, looking for other recordings he might have ignored. Clicks on the folder from 3 days ago. Office camera. Time, 11:47 p.m. The screen shows the empty office. The door opens slowly, almost soundlessly. Elena enters, but it isn't the furtive movement of someone stealing. It is the careful movement of someone who doesn't want to wake anyone. She closes the door behind her, looks around as if searching for something specific, walks to the bookshelf. Her fingers glide over the spines of the books, slowly with a strange reverence, as if that place meant something to her. Edward frowns, leans closer to the screen. Elena stops in front of a lower shelf, crouches down, picks up a picture frame that is half hidden behind other objects. Edward recognizes the frame. It's antique, silver, tarnished by time. He himself never paid much attention to it. It was something his father kept, a family heirloom he never bothered to clean or examine. On the screen, Elena holds the frame with both hands, looks at the photo inside. Edward can't see the image from where he is, but he sees Elena's face change. Her eyes fill with tears. Her lips tremble. She brings the frame to her chest, closes her eyes, and whispers something. Edward turns up the volume on the recording. The audio is muffled, but he can hear. "Grandma," whispers Elena, voice choked. "I made it inside. Now I'm going to prove you were innocent." Edward freezes, repeats the sentence in his head, tries to fit the words into context, tries to understand. Elena kisses the glass of the frame, caresses the rim, then, carefully, puts everything back in the exact place it was, wipes her tears with the back of her hand, takes a deep breath, and leaves the office, closing the door slowly behind her. The recording ends. Edward stares at the dark screen, trying to process what he just saw. Grandma, innocent. He gets up from the chair, walks to the bookshelf, picks up the frame Elena held, brings it near the light. The photo is old, black and white, edges yellowed by time. It shows a black woman, young, in a nurse's uniform. The uniform is impeccable, hair pulled back, gaze direct at the camera, with a dignity that spans decades. In the bottom right corner of the photo, handwritten in faded ink, there is a name, Mary Elena Sanders, 1975. Edward feels something cold slide down his spine. Mary Elena Sanders. Elena's last name is Sanders. He turns the frame over. On the back, written in pencil, almost erased, "The best nurse this house ever had. I will never forget her care. AMS. AMS. Amelia Marquez Sterling, his grandmother." Edward sits down again, slowly, holding the frame as if it were a bomb that could explode at any moment. His mind races, tries to remember old stories, conversations he heard as a child, things his father said, drunk, late at night. There was a story, a maid, a scandal, jewelry that vanished, a theft that was never proven, but stained an entire family. Edward always knew this story only as a warning. Never trust the help too much, his father used to say. They will always disappoint you. But what if the story was different? What if it hadn't been theft? He gets up again, now with a purpose. Walks to the other side of the office where there is an old safe built into the wall, behind a heavy painting. His father died 3 years ago. Edward inherited everything but never opened the safe. Never wanted to touch old things. Always thought the past should stay buried. But now, for the first time, he needs to know. He takes the painting off the wall. The safe is dark iron with an old combination lock. Edward knows the code. He wrote it down somewhere when the lawyer transferred the assets. Searches the drawer, finds a crumpled paper. The numbers are there, written in his father's handwriting. Turns the lock. Click, click, click. The safe opens. He expected to find money, important documents, maybe jewelry. But inside there are only old papers, yellowed, smelling of mold, and a small wooden box. Edward takes the box first, opens it. Inside there is a necklace. It isn't extravagant, but it's beautiful. Antique gold with a sapphire pendant. There is also a pair of matching earrings. He frowns. He's never seen these jewels before. Never heard his mother or grandmother mention them. Picks up the papers. They are letters. Some in sealed envelopes, others loose, folded multiple times. The first letter he opens is written in the shaky handwriting of someone very elderly. The paper is yellowed, torn at the edges. The date at the top says, December 1995. Edward begins to read. "My dear son, if you are reading this, it is because I am gone. And there is something I need to confess, something I carried with me for years, and which shames me deeply. 20 years ago, I accused an innocent woman of theft. Her name was Mary Elena Sanders. She was the house nurse, cared for your grandmother Amelia, with a dedication I never saw in anyone. When your grandmother passed away, we found a set of jewelry missing. Immediately, I accused Mary Elena, called the police, exposed her publicly, destroyed her reputation. But I was wrong. Days later, I found a letter your grandmother had left. In it, Amelia explained she had given the jewelry to Mary Elena as a gift, as thanks for years of care. There was even a deed of gift, signed and witnessed. I should have gone after Mary Elena, should have asked for forgiveness, should have cleared her name. But I didn't. I was afraid of the shame, afraid to admit I had destroyed an innocent woman's life, afraid the family would know I had acted out of greed, not justice. So I hid everything, hid the letter, hid the deed, hid the jewelry, and let Mary Elena carry the guilt. She disappeared soon after. We never heard from her again. And I carried this guilt until today. If you find this letter, please look for her family. Return the jewelry. Return the dignity I took. That is the only request I make. Your father, Arthur Sterling. Edward reads the letter 3 times. Every word is a stab wound. Every sentence rearranges everything he thought he knew about his own family. He looks at the jewelry inside the box. Those jewels that were never stolen, that were given as a gift, but that his grandfather turned into a crime. And Elena, who entered that house not to steal, but to clear her grandmother's name. Elena, whom he accused, humiliated, watched, exactly as his grandfather had done to Mary Elena Sanders 50 years ago. History was repeating itself, and he was the echo of his own grandfather's sin. Edward feels something break inside him. It isn't anger, it isn't sadness. It is something worse. It is the devastating realization that he has become exactly the kind of man he always despised. He grabs the jewelry box, grabs the letter, leaves the office barefoot, still in pajamas, walking down the hall toward the back room where Elena sleeps. Stops before the door. Raises his hand to knock, but hesitates. What will he say? How does he start to fix something like this? Takes a deep breath. Knocks lightly. Silence. Knocks again, a little harder. The door opens. Elena is there, standing, dressed, as if she had already been awake for hours. Her eyes are red, swollen. She looks at him with a mix of surprise and fear. Mr. Sterling? Her voice is careful. He opens his mouth, but the words don't come. Looks at the box in his hands, at the letter, at her face. I need, he begins, but his voice cracks. I need to apologize. Elena frowns. Sir? Edward extends the box to her. This is yours, he says, voice raspy. It was always yours. Or your grandmother's. My grandfather. He lied. He accused her of theft. But it wasn't theft. It was a gift. And he hid the truth for 50 years. Elena looks at the box but doesn't take it. Her eyes fill with tears. You knew? She asks, voice trembling. You knew the whole time? Edward shakes his head. No. I swear I didn't know. I just found out now. I saw you in the office on the recording, and then I looked into it and found this. He opens the box. The jewels shine under the dim hallway light. Elena covers her mouth with her hand. Tears stream down. My grandmother died believing she was a thief, she whispers. Died in shame. Could never get work again. The whole family carried that mark. I know, says Edward, and there is genuine pain in his voice. And I am so sorry. I am sorry for what my grandfather did, and I am sorry for what I did to you. Elena looks at him. There is anger there is pain, but there is also something else, something that looks like exhaustion, an exhaustion that spans generations. You accused me of everything, she says, voice low but firm. You humiliated me, watched me, treated me like a criminal, exactly like your grandfather did to my grandmother. I know, repeats Edward, unable to find other words. I know. He extends the box again. Please. Accept it, and if there is any way I can fix this. Elena takes the box finally, holds it as if it were something sacred, looks at the jewels, at the letter, at the man before her. I don't know if you can fix 50 years of injustice, Mr. Sterling, she says, but maybe we can start. Edward nods, unable to speak. Turns to leave, but Elena calls him. Mr. Sterling. He stops. Lucy still needs care, says Elena. And I still need this job. So let's make a deal. I stay. I take care of her. And you treat me with the respect my grandmother never had. He looks at her, sees the strength in those eyes, the same strength that was in her grandmother's photo. Deal, he says. And for the first time since Elena entered that house, he really looks at her. Not as a maid, not as a threat, but as a person, as someone who deserved from the beginning to be seen. Edward doesn't sleep that night. He sits in the office surrounded by old papers, his father's letter, the jewels that carry decades of lies. The dawn light begins to enter through the window, but he doesn't even notice. He is lost in thoughts that tangle like knotted threads. In the days that follow, he changes, not in an obvious way, not dramatically. But people around him notice. Marianne notices he is quieter. Lucy notices her dad doesn't yell anymore when she asks for Miss Elena. Mrs. Higgins, fired quietly after Edward showed her the recording, is no longer there to witness. Elena keeps working, takes care of Lucy, cleans the house, prepares meals. But there is something different in the air. Edward doesn't follow her with his eyes anymore, doesn't ask accusatory questions, doesn't invent suspicions. He observes her, yes, but now it is with something else in his eyes, something that looks like guilt, something that looks like a search for redemption. 2 weeks later, Edward leaves the house in a suit, goes to the city's central records office, spends hours there, flipping through old logs, filling out forms, talking to clerks who look at him with impatience. He searches for the deed of gift his father mentioned in the letter, the one that proves the jewelry was given, not stolen. It takes 3 days, but he finds it. It is a yellowed document, filed in a forgotten folder in the back of the archives. Grandmother Amelia's handwriting is clear despite the age of the paper. I, Amelia Marcus Sterling, being of sound mind, give as a gift to Mary Elena Sanders, in recognition of years of dedicated care, the following set of jewelry. There are 2 witnesses. Legible signatures, official stamps, it is everything he needed. Edward requests a certified copy, pays the fees, puts the document in a new clean envelope, returns home with the envelope under his arm, as if carrying something fragile. That afternoon he calls Elena to the office. She enters with the same upright posture as always, but there is a new tension in her shoulders. Since the conversation in the hallway, she avoids being alone with him, greets him politely but keeps her distance. "Mr. Sterling?" she asks, standing in the doorway. He is standing behind the desk, not sitting as he always did, in a position of power, standing, vulnerable, uncomfortable. "Please sit down," he says, pointing to the chair across the desk. Elena hesitates, then sits, hands in her lap, fingers interlaced. Edward picks up the envelope, holds it for a moment, takes a deep breath. He begins, but his voice catches, clears his throat. "I spent the last few weeks investigating, searching for the truth about what happened to your grandmother." Elena says nothing, just looks at him, waiting. "And I found this." He extends the envelope. Elena takes it slowly, as if it could burn her hands, opens it, pulls the document out. Her eyes scan the lines once, twice. Her hands begin to shake. "It's the deed," says Edward, voice firmer now. "It is proof that the jewels were a gift, that your grandmother didn't steal anything, that she was accused unjustly." Elena doesn't look up from the paper. Tears begin to flow, silent, wetting the edges of the document. Edward tries to continue, but his voice fails again. He squeezes his eyes shut, forcing the words out. Your grandmother wasn't a thief. The one who stole her dignity was my family, was my grandfather, and I repeated the same mistake." Elena finally looks up. There is pain there. There is anger. But there is also something resembling relief, as if a weight of decades is slowly being lifted. "Why?" she asks, voice raspy. "Why did your grandfather do that? Why did he lie?" Edward shakes his head. Greed, I think. Pride. Fear of admitting he was wrong. He hid the truth until he died. And my father found out too late. Was ashamed to fix it. So he buried it all. Elena looks at the document again, runs her fingers over the old letters, as if she could touch her grandmother through them. "She died 10 years ago," whispers Elena. "Died alone, in a rented room, unable to work again. People said she was a thief, that she couldn't be trusted. My mother grew up hearing that. I grew up hearing that. She wipes her tears with the back of her hand. I came to work here because I needed to prove she was innocent. I wanted to find anything. A paper, a letter, proof. I was ready to give up. I was almost accepting I would never know the truth. She looks up at Edward. And now you give me this. Edward swallows hard. I know this doesn't erase what happened. I know 50 years of injustice aren't fixed with a document. But it is what I can do, and I apologize. For everything, for every accusation, for every look of mistrust, for having treated you exactly how my grandfather treated your grandmother. Elena stands up, holds the document tightly as if it were the most valuable thing in the world. Because it is. I don't need your forgiveness, Mr. Sterling, she says, voice firm. Without anger, just fact. I just needed this. She turns and walks toward the door. Stops, looks back one last time. Thank you for finding the truth, even if it took 50 years, and leaves. Edward stands alone in the office, sits down slowly in the chair, buries his face in his hands, and for the first time in a long time, he weeps. 1 year later, Edward's life is unrecognizable. The family business went bankrupt, bad management, bad investments, rash decisions. Marianne asked for a divorce, took Lucy. The estate was sold to pay debts. Edward now lives in a small apartment downtown, working as a salesman in an electronics store. It isn't an easy life, but it is an honest life. He is leaving work on a Tuesday afternoon, walking down the busy street, when he passes a nursing clinic. It is modern, clean, with new signs on the facade. Something makes him stop. Maybe it's the name of the clinic. Mary Elena Sanders Health Center. He looks at the sign, feels something tighten in his chest, enters. The reception is spacious, well lit. There are nurses circulating, patients waiting, the constant sound of phones ringing and people talking. Edward stands there, sort of lost, not quite knowing why he entered. And then he sees her. Elena is crossing the hallway, wearing a white lab coat, a stethoscope hanging around her neck. Her hair is different, shorter, more professional. Her eyes are focused, determined. She is talking to another doctor, pointing at a clipboard, discussing a case with authority. On the wall behind her, there is a plaque. Elena Sanders, head nurse. Edward feels the air catch for a second. It is like seeing the old photo of her grandmother coming to life. The same posture, the same dignity, the same strength. Elena finishes the conversation and turns to enter an emergency room. That is when she sees him. Their eyes meet. There is a second of recognition. Edward lowers his head automatically, doesn't know what to do, doesn't know what to say. Elena says nothing, just looks at him for a second longer. There is no anger in her gaze. There is no forgiveness. Just acknowledgement that both exist, that their stories crossed and that life went on. Then a voice shouts from the other side of the hall, "Head nurse, we need you here." Elena turns and runs toward the emergency, leaving Edward behind. He stands there, still in the reception, watching her disappear down the hallway, watching her save another life, watching her be exactly what her grandmother always was, someone who cares, even when the world doesn't care for her back. And Edward understands something in that moment. He understands that justice isn't a moment, it isn't a conversation, it isn't an apology. Justice is Elena standing in that hallway, with the white coat and her grandmother's name on the wall. Justice is her having managed to renew her license, restore her family's name, build a life that honors everything that was taken from her. Justice is her no longer needing him for anything. Edward leaves the clinic, walks back home, the sun setting behind the buildings, the noisy city all around. And for the first time he feels that maybe, just maybe, he did the right thing. Even if late, even if imperfect, even if insufficient. Because sometimes redemption isn't about being forgiven. It is about recognizing the error, returning what was stolen, and stepping out of the scene so the wounded person can finally live without the weight of the past. Now I ask you, in Elena's place, would you have forgiven Edward? Or would you have taken justice into your own hands? Write your opinion in the comments. I want to know what you would do. This story teaches us that the mistakes of a generation can echo for decades, but that the truth, however delayed, always finds its way. It teaches that justice is not revenge, but restoration, that the greatest victory is not watching the oppressor fall, but rising in spite of him. If you like stories that touch the heart, that show the strength of those who fight against entire systems of injustice, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon to be part of our family. Because these are the stories that remind us it is possible to restore what was broken, even if it takes a lifetime.